Peace to the world. My name is CJ Alton. Thank you so much for being here at this presentation. Listen, we're going to be talking about Pan-Africanism, the Pan-African movement, and why it's important for us as African diasporas all over the world to work together because we are powerful together, not so powerful individually. So I promise you, what I'm going to bring to you today is one of the most dominant, most prolific presentations, Pan-African presentations to date. I know it sounds a bit arrogant, but I promise you, what I present to you today is going to really put something in your brain to see just how well we can work together and just how wealthy we are as a people, as a family. So thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to get straight into it. Let's get into it. So here we have it, right? The title of this presentation, the Pan-African Movement runs through African Americans. And of course, again, my name is CJ Alton. And as you can see by the date, I've been working on this for a good minute now, thinking about this. I was inspired by this presentation through a conversation / debate that I had with some folks, some Black folks, of course, when I expressed that the wealthiest set of African diasporas are African Americans. And I'm not sure if they misunderstood me or what that case was, but they said, no, 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 we're not. They said, Africa's wealthy and that kind of stuff. I don't think they quite understood what I meant. What I meant was we are the wealthiest. We have the highest buying power out of any other African diaspora around the world. So this presentation is inspired by that, so I can show you just how wealthy we are as African Americans and how, and really, we should contribute to the Pan-African movement for the rest of our brothers and sisters around the world to ultimately benefit from, right? So that we can establish industries for ourselves, institutions for ourselves. We have to take care of ourselves. So that's what this presentation is about, all right? So let's get into it. So what is Pan-Africanism? Simply put, it's the principle, advocacy, and movement of a political union for the African or Afro diaspora around the world. So simply put, it is a faction, right? It's a political group. It is a not even political, but it can be social, economic. It is really just a family coming together as a people, right? And that in this case, African or Afro people coming together and utilizing their resources, their land, right, and their capital to really just bring about a better overall life for one another, right? So just an example, here in America, we have African Americans. A Pan-African movement is us associating with our brothers in Colombia, Haiti, right? Anywhere else across Africa, actually. So those are just some examples, but that is Pan-Africanism. It's us working together and utilizing our resources to create a better life. So we're going to be talking about buying power quite a bit. So I want to be able to break this down just so you have a little bit of an understanding, right? So what you're looking at is the United States buying power. Okay, and I broke it down by ethnicity, and I want you to see the growth of buying power from 2010 to really 2023, just so you can see a little bit of the growth and or discrepancies, right? You can see other groups doing much, much better than others. Okay. So when you break this down, you look at the Black group, right? We had just under $1 trillion in 2010. Now we have approximately 1.6 trillion. You look at the white group, that is 9.4 trillion. And now they have about 13.8 trillion today, right? Asians, in the American Asian Pacific Islander, I want to say that correctly. In 2010, they had 603.5 billion. And as you can see, they have grown tremendously in the last decade with 1.3 trillion. And Hispanics, you can see in 2010 had about 1 trillion and have grown as well, just about double with 1.9 trillion in the last decade, right? And Native Americans at the very bottom, 82.5 billion in 2010, and now you see they have 136 billion today. So when you look at these numbers, I know you don't have them off top. I know you don't know the percentages, but there are groups doing much, much better than others. So the total buying power in the United States is about $17 trillion, approximately. The white group alone has almost 14 trillion. So we know that they're the majority in America, but they still make up almost just around 80% of the buying power in America. So with the population that's only about 60%, yet they have about 80% of the buying power, it can show where the racism lies in this country, where a bit of the discrepancy lies in this country. Likewise, I believe the Black group, if I'm not mistaken, we don't have any more than 9% of the buying power, yet we make up about 15% of the country, right? But yet we only have approximately about 9% of the buying power. So we are lagging behind. Asians are doing quite well with 1.3 trillion. That is above average in comparison with its demographic. I believe they're about 5 or 6% of the population in America. And that holds about, I don't recall, but just around maybe 7 or 8% of the buying power in this country. So they're doing above average, put it that way. And then Hispanics, they're doing just about below average in comparison with their population. They make up about 17, 18%. And obviously that number is not 17, 18% of the buying power. So to be very truthful, the white group is absolutely dominating with buying power. They are ultimately who earn the money and hold the money, as well as Asians. All right. And of course, Native Americans not doing too well either. So moving along, I broke this down, right, in very many ways in terms of how I'm going to go through each country. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present 10 countries, right, in this case, that I feel have significance to the Pan-African movement, okay? And so how I broke this down, right, through the method is I tracked their population, right, the overall population of the country. I then tracked their African Afro population, right, which is pertaining to the population that identifies as some or all African descent, right? And then I calculated their country GDP, which is fairly easy to find. So the gross domestic production of the country, right? So that's fairly easy to track. You can look that up yourself. What's not so easy was tracking the African Afro buying power, which I calculated by the national GDP. And then I took the percentage of the Afro or African population of that country, and then I split it by 2. So I know that's kind of confusing. No worries. I'm going to give you an example. So how I even came across this method and how I even did this was simply tracking, again, the United States' buying power. And when I realized that Black people only hold about 9% of the buying power, I immediately said, well, technically, we should be owning an equitable amount, right? But we don't. So then, because I know racism is all over the world, I applied that to each and every last country that you're going to see being presented. So the 10 countries, I use this method. So watch. For the United States, for example, right? We have 330 million people in this country, right? Out of that, 47 million approximately are African descent, right? Or Afro people, right? That's the African population. It's 47 million. The country's GDP is $22 trillion. Yet the country's buying power in this case is $17 trillion. Now, originally, I took the African buying power, which is 1.6 trillion, right? And I applied it to the country's GDP, which was 22 trillion. And that showed that we only own 7%, right, of the country's GDP. But here's the problem. You cannot, technically speaking, right, from a scientific point of view, you cannot attribute buying power in GDP. It's just a touch bit different because GDP is gross domestic product, meaning there has to be some kind of border. So like California has its own GDP, Nevada has its own GDP, Florida, New York, they have GDPs because they're bordered. There's borders around it. So therefore they can track it, right? When you look at the African buying power, we're talking about all of the United States. So technically there's no border, but we still can at least track how much money we make and how much money we're able to spend because we are in the United States, right? So let's just kind of go through this. I'll take this slow. If something's confusing, just run it back. You can replay it. So 1.6 is only 9% of 17, right? So I'm talking about 1.6 trillion in compared to 17 trillion in buying power, as you can see. If this country was equitable and fair, which we know the United States is not, but if it was, equity should give African Americans at least $2.4 trillion in buying power. We should at least, right? But that's not the case because of racism, discrimination, so forth, so forth. So what I did in this case, right? Because if I did 1.6 divided by 22 trillion, that would have gave 7%, right? 1.6 of 22 is basically 7%. Now, if you can look at the African population of the United States, it's 14%. We're 14% of the country, yet we almost own 7% of the buying power. So what I did was I slashed it by 2. So I measured country buying power by slashing equity buying power by half, right? So, or 2, basically, right? So you're going to see that there's another country that's going to be on this list. I want to surprise you. I don't want to say it. But there's another country on this list where I was able to find an article to show their actual buying power. It was only 2 of the 10 countries, excuse me, where I was able to track or find their exact buying power. And so based off of that second country's example, this method actually underestimates the value of each country's buying power. Meaning, I made sure to underestimate buying power rather than overestimate because I didn't want to, hype up the number, the total number. I would rather underestimate it and have economists, because I'm not an economist, but I want an actual real Pan-African economist to track down the actual buying power. And I can assure you they're going to use a similar method. But nonetheless, this is all approximate. This is all average. I don't want you to get too stern on me, okay? I'm not an economist. I've taken a couple of economic courses, but nonetheless, I'm a political scientist. I just organize, all right? So that said, I want to go ahead and begin talking about who is a part of this Pan-African coalition, all right? So I'm going to be presenting 10 countries that I believe are significant to the Pan-African coalition outside of Africa, right? So these countries you're going to find hold a large number of African or Afro descendants, diaspora outside of Africa. And I feel we could work together, utilizing our resources, our land, our labor, excuse me, and capital. All right. So I promise you, you're going to have some fun. If you're a descendant from one of these countries or many of these countries, you're really going to enjoy this presentation. All right. You're going to enjoy this next part. So let's get to it. Number 10, Cuba. The population of Cuba is 11.3 million people, right? Approximately. The African or Afro population of Cuba is 1.1 million people. All right. So that's just around like a good 10%, just around that. The country's overall GDP is $107.4 billion. Okay, so as you can see, they're a small country, and you'll see that the United States is just blowing people out the water with money, but we'll talk about that. Now, at the bottom there, this is the Afro buying power, right? This is the African descendant buying power, which I believe approximately is $5.37 billion. This is the 1.1 million Afro descendants in Cuba. This is what I believe their buying power could be. So again, if we go back to this example, right? Afro people, Afro Cubans make up just about 10%. So 10% of that country's GDP would be what? Just around 10 billion, right? Just around that. So I take that 10 billion, but because of racism and discrimination, again, as we've spoken, right? I slashed it by 2, and I underestimated the value, which gave me $5.3 billion. And economists could argue that it could be more or less. That's for them to find out. But that is how that works. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, I want to discuss the significance of each country as I go along. And I feel the significance of Cuba is its political independence. Cuba has been able to fight through a lot of, I guess you can call it harassment from Western countries, you know, with Fidel Castro and dealing with multiple wars and so forth. Cuba has stayed strong in believing in their political government. Some people want to call it communism. I believe it's probably more of socialism. But nonetheless, I believe Cuba is significant to this movement because they have different ideologies and they operate differently, right? This is not to say that Cuba's perfect, but as you can see, Cuba is obviously standing strong still. So we have to commend that. Now, here's the beauty about Cuba that I love is their capital city, Havana, Cuba. Havana has over 800,000 Afro descendants in the city. So with 800,000, and there's only a total of 1.1 million, you can see that the capital of Cuba is very Black. So I really do think that is significant. I appreciate that. And I believe in my heart of hearts, Cubans know that they are Afro people. They come from Africa, and they represent that culture in very many ways. So shout out to Cuba. Let's keep moving along. What's the next country? Yes, absolutely. Number 9, Mexico. The population of Mexico is an astounding 130 million people, right? The Afro population, which is relatively small, is 2.5 million people. Now, because they have such a large population, the GDP is obviously going to be higher, but still relatively small in compared to the United States, right? The country's GDP is $1.29 trillion. The Afro buying power in this case is approximately $13 billion. So I believe that Mexico, the significance is its land and its Afro history. Mexico has an abundance of unoccupied land, more specifically in that southwest region where there actually is held a lot of Afro Mexicans. You could find that in history books or just simply go to YouTube. You could find that out. Now, the Afro history is very special there. For what I've read, West Africans in the 14th century, right, the 1300s, are recorded to be in Mexico before Columbus embarked on the land, before Spain embarked and held these Aztecs, if you will, hostage and condemned them to slavery, right? So it's very important to learn that Afro history. I'm ecstatic every single time I see Mexicans embracing their Black culture. It is special, and there's a lot, and I could go on, but we don't have that kind of time, right? I'll have to create an entire Mexico presentation, but that is the significance of Mexico to this movement, is they have a little change to give, but more so they have land, and we could just educate these folks, right? This would dramatically increase the awareness of Afro-Mexicans and what Mexicans, other Mexicans that classify as another descent or another ethnicity, how they can help their brothers and sisters. All right. So let's move on to the next country. Number 8, the United Kingdom. And I found that little cool Pan African English flag up there at the top. I thought it was cool, so I put it there. But anyways, the population of the United Kingdom is 67.3 million people, right? The African population there is quite small. It's 2 million people, which, if my math was correct, I believe makes up just around 4%. Now, the country GDP is $3.18 trillion, which is relatively good given the population that they have, right? The buying power, right, of the 2 million Afro descendants in the United Kingdom is $47.7 billion. That is by far more than any country that we have reviewed thus far. So that pretty much states its significance, right? The significance of this country is easily its currency. The United Kingdom arguably has the most valuable currency they call the pound, which was based off of a gold standard. Now, in 2023, there's a lot going on. A lot of people can argue a bunch of different things about the gold standard and where the pound and the euro currently stands. But nonetheless, that buying power with that little people is just way too significant for this movement. And I believe that we definitely could use our brothers and sisters up there in the cold, up there in Europe, to help us fund Pan-African projects. All right, so let's move on to the next country. Shout out to the Black folks in the United Kingdom. Number 7, gotta be Haiti. Have to include our brothers and sisters in Haiti. The population there is 12 million people. Now look at this, right? The highest Afro-African population thus far on the list, with 11.5 million people. We have to include Haiti as part of this Pan-African movement. We have too many brothers and sisters down there struggling financially and overall economically, right, to find opportunities. But let's keep going. The country's GDP is $21 billion, which, as you can see, is the smallest GDP thus far on the list, especially given its population. So, with that, its buying power could be approximately, right? The Afro buying power is $9 billion approximately. So, as you can see, Haiti doesn't have a lot of money, but the significance could be, in my opinion, labor power, but also education. I think that there's a opportunity to educate Haitians and get them involved in the workforce, right? If we can utilize these folks to give them labor, right, that would obviously supply jobs there, that would obviously build the economy. They can use their natural resources, or we can provide them with natural resources, and they could, in my opinion, create final products where they can ship and sell them out to whoever, America, Europe, Africa, right? South Africa, the Caribbean, or South America, I meant to say, and then the Caribbean. I mean, whoever. But I feel there's too many human bodies down there that can use opportunity. And I think that the Pan-African family can supply this group with education and resources to create products for themselves, create businesses for themselves so that they can thrive. So in my opinion, Haiti has to be a part of this family. Shout out to Haiti. I talked to a couple of folks down there. Beautiful people, nonetheless. And it's a beautiful culture. I wish them the best. Now, this next country, let's go. Yes, of course. Number 6, Jamaica. Trust me, I'm not biased. And I have to admit, right now, today, as I'm speaking through this microphone, I am in Ocho Rios, Jamaica. Jamaicans know it as Ochi. We have our own patois here. That's their slang. But nonetheless, they got to be a part of this movement. We're too powerful. Our culture is vibrant. But let me get to it. Population is 2.8 million people. We're a small little island, man. And our African Afro population is approximately 2.6 million. Okay. The country's GDP is small. It's $13.6 billion. And our Afro buying power is approximately $6.39 billion. So we're a little tiny country. We're small, but we're impactful. Okay. Everybody knows Jamaica. Everybody loves Jamaica. Our culture is vibrant. The people here are just so unique and so different, in my opinion. And I'm not stomping on any other country or culture, but I'm telling you, it's absolutely vibrant here. We're a powerful people. We're a revolutionary people. And between us and our sister Haiti, right, we are two countries that really stand on our 10 toes. Now, you could get into the government corruption and all that, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get too far into that. That's not what this is about. But our significance to this Pan-African movement, well, is a meeting ground. I feel like our hospitality, our tourism industry is one of a kind, and it's been that way for a very long time now. Jamaica thrives off of its tourist industry. And when you look at it from a geographical standpoint, when you look at these 10 countries that I'm going to present, Jamaica is actually geographically a great place to meet up as a Pan-African coalition. We're just about right in the middle of everybody, right? And we speak the English language. That's the country's main language. Obviously, patois is a bit mixed in there, and you'll get a lot of that. But nonetheless, English is the main language. So I feel like we would be able to relate to a lot of other powerful countries. But yes, Jamaica, without question, has to be part of this Pan-African coalition. So the next country, yes, number 5, the Dominican Republic. This country actually surprised me a lot, given its Afro population. I had no clue before this research. So the population is approximately 11 million people in the Dominican Republic. Now, out of that, check this out. Out of that, the African Afro population is 8 million people, approximately, which shows that island, that country, is about 70% Black. 70%. But when you actually come to think of it, and you look at the Dominican Republic on a map, it's attached to Haiti, right? And a couple centuries ago, it used to be called, I don't want to pronounce it wrong, Hispaniola, something like that. So between Dominican Republic and Haiti, that's what they used to be called, Hispaniola. But obviously they divided, revolutionary efforts, you get the point. So it's no brainer that, yeah, the Dominican Republic would have an abundance of Black people, right? It's attached to Haiti, so it only makes sense. The country's GDP, though, look at this. It's $94.2 billion, which is almost 5 times what Haiti GDP is. And I believe that's because Haiti has, separated itself from France and really the overall Western hemisphere in regards to social, political, and economic grounding. So what I mean by that is Haiti is they're independent. That's the best way I could say it. As far as the DR, right? They're still connected to the IMF, which is the International Monetary Funding, right? The World Bank, obviously still connected to Spaniard culture, right? So they get a bit more of a break. Not to mention, there's a lot of baseball players in the MLB, right? So that probably attributes a bit to his country's GDP. But nonetheless, its Afro buying power is $42.4 billion, which is a large amount, right? And that's because of the amount of people that they have that are African or Afro. So this would definitely work out significantly. Not to mention they speak Spanish, so they would be able to connect with Mexico and Cuba and so forth, and some other countries you'll see in a minute. But their labor power. Now, I don't want to mislead anybody. The DR is still a very, very poor place. I don't want to make you think that it's a wealthy place at all. It's economically still very poor. So just because you see the 94.2, well, that's because they have a bit of a higher population than some other islands, right? So that's why you see a higher bid. But nonetheless, we can still utilize that 8 million people for labor power. So they can obviously do the same thing as I talked about with Haiti, right? So maybe just an idea, Haiti can use its raw resources and have some kind of connection with the DR to finalize production. However that might be. I'm not the guy to really design these projects. I'm just here to point the obvious out. So yes, without question, given its 70% Afro-African population, the DR has to be part of the movement. All right, so shout out to the DR. I gotta visit there one day. The next country is France. Number 4, France. The population, 67.5 million people. The Afro or African population is 5 million people, so relatively small, right? Less than 10%. The country's GDP still is $2.9 trillion. So France does very well for itself. And so given that, the Afro buying power is approximately $107 billion. So again, right, the significance of Afro-French is its currency. They deal with the euro. So they have an abundance of money. If I'm not mistaken, this is the largest buying power that we have thus far on this list, right? So it's without question that France has to be a part of this Pan-African coalition. France has a very unique history when it comes to Black folks in Africa and around the world. We've seen what they've done to Haiti, and we've seen what they've done to other islands, but more specifically Haiti. They have treated them like subhuman. So that in and of itself is in need of reparations and repairing. France has also, if you know anything about West Africa, a lot of West Africans speak the French language. So France has done a number on Africa, with people like Napoleon and things of that nature, destroying artifacts. I mean, the list just goes on and on. But without question, however you want to look at it, France has to be a part of this development and this movement. There's just too much money involved in France for it not to contribute to this coalition, right? So shout out to France, shout out to the French, shout out to Mbappe and Pogba, if you're a football fan, all that good stuff, right? Shout out to everybody. Obviously, their money is part of that African buying power. So hopefully they can contribute. Let's keep going. Yes, we have finally made our way to South America. I know some of you were, where's South America? Where's South America? Don't worry, they're here. They're just extremely significant to the movement, so we have to wait. The number 3 country is Colombia, right? With the population of 52 million people. The approximate Afro-African population is just around 13 million people. So that is about 25% of the country, just around a quarter of the country. Now, the country's GDP is relatively very small. It's also a very poor country. It's $314.4 billion, right? So as I said, relatively small. Its buying power, if you could compare it, right, to what we just saw with France, is small. It's $40 billion. So there's not a lot of money in Colombia in regards to its Afro people, but nonetheless, it's still a very vibrant and powerful country. I'm going to explain just why. So obviously, its significance can be labor power, right? With 13 million Afro descendants, we can't forget about our brothers and sisters in Colombia. But check this out. 2 cities in specific, right? That I looked across was Cartagena and Cali. Now, I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to mix the two, but I believe it's Cali, right? Cali has approximately 1.1 million Afro people in its city. One city has over 1 million Afro people. This city has to be utilized as part of the African coalition. Cartagena has almost 500,000 Afro people in its country. So with those two just alone, we're talking about more than 1.5 million people in just those 2 cities. Now, hopefully I didn't get the 2 twisted, but nonetheless, that can be utilized greatly to establish whatever grounds need to be established there, right? Whatever final production, whatever products need to be there. I mean, y'all can think of what Colombia needs more than I can. I'm not ultra familiar with Colombia, but I do know that they have cities that not even the United States has in regards to the number of people. The United States does not have not one city where they have over 1 million Black folks in a city, in one area. There's not one city in America, trust me. I believe Brooklyn and Detroit come as close as it can with a couple of hundred thousands. But other than that, we don't have that. And I believe that that is very significant to this movement to utilize it. Not to mention it's South America, and we're talking about Pan-Africanism. So we have to make sure that we're touching just about the entire globe, right? So that's the significance and the importance of Colombia. We have to utilize those cities. We have to utilize these people. Now let's move on to the next country. Of course, you have to include number 2, Brazil. There is no coalition without this grand country of Brazil. I've been a fan of Brazil ever since 2002 World Cup when I was just a child. And since then, I have never let go of Brazil because I've increasingly have found out more and more about the country. And I found out just how Afro, just how Black this country is. And I love it. Look at the numbers here. So population, 209 million people. Here's the startling number that I love to see every single time. I love it. And this is declared off of their census. These are Brazilians declaring themselves as African or Afro, which is 112 million people out of that 209 million. So that is just around half, 50% of the country declaring themselves as African or part African descent. That is their census. I have like 2 or 3 sources you can see at the end where I shared this information or I found this information. So it's true and I love it. I do. The country's GDP is is $1.06 trillion. Country GDP, $1.06 trillion. Now, if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned something. I mentioned that 2 out of the 10 countries, I was able to find their exact buying power. I found an article, right? I found an article that established the Black Brazilian buying power. So that number you see, the Afro buying power at the bottom there of $435 billion, I did not have to calculate that using my method. That is just there. That was already found by other scientists. Congratulations to those scientists. I put the resources at the end. You will see it. So congrats to them. But look, if you use my method still, right? We're talking about 1.06 trillion. So if half of Brazil is declared as Afro or Black, that would be approximately what? $500 billion. But you have to slash it by 2, by half, remember? So that would give us just around 250 billion Afro buying power, $250 billion in Afro buying power. But look, the Brazilian scientists themselves have calculated that they have 435 billion. So this entire time with these countries, it is safe to say that I could have been underestimating all of these numbers, these buying powers, and that we could have more money than what I've already have been able to establish. So my method, based off of this second example with Brazil, can show to hold up. And hopefully economists can back me up, but hopefully they can find these other countries' Afro buying power. So the significance of Brazil is quite simple. It's its land and its population. Brazil is a large, huge country. Most of that is made up by the Amazon, which makes up a lot of the world's oxygen. The world gets a lot of its oxygen from Brazil and the Amazon, which is why it's extremely important. to protect the Amazon as much as possible and not have certain mercenaries burn down the forest just to find minerals and so forth, so forth. It's another presentation. But its population. What more can you say about 112 million Black people? You don't find that anywhere else. The United States doesn't have it. No country outside of Africa has this many Afro people. Brazil is just too significant, and I need to visit. I really do. So I don't speak Portuguese, which has been a bit of a hamper in communication. But if you're Brazilian and you speak English, please reach out to me. Please, please, please. So, of course, here we are with the last country, right? The next country on the list, of course, number one, the United States of America. Our population, as we've seen, is 330 million people. Out of that is 47 million African Americans. Some would even go up to 50 million when you include some of the mixed race folks. But nonetheless, 47 million is what we'll go with. If you've been paying attention, right, our country's GDP is $23 trillion, which is far more than any other country on this particular list. It's far more. Our buying power as African Americans is $1.6 trillion. We have way too much money as a people, not as individuals, but as a people, not to build this Pan-African movement. Our significance to this movement is obviously our financial powerhouse. But I must be fair and I must be honest. I'm very disappointed in Black Americans thus far, going up to 2023, on how we don't work well enough together as a people. Yes, you have some factions and groups that work together and do great things, of course. But nonetheless, there's some of us that can't even get along locally. We can't even get along statewide. And we certainly can't get along from a national standpoint. So how do we move this thing internationally? I don't know. But here's what I will say, because I want this to be clear. I do believe that Black African Americans, right? That's Black African Americans, same thing, whatever. I do believe African Americans in the United States are the most psychologically damaged people in the world. And that is why the system, right, or the matrix, whatever you want to call it, keeps us down, because they don't want us to thrive as a people, because they know this buying power and they know what we can do. So we as African Americans in America have to take responsibility. As you can see, we have more money than anybody, any other African diaspora in any other country. The most. We have to push this. We have to use our resources, right? We have to use our intelligence, right? And our capital to make this project happen, however it may look. But it's going to have to include us. We have to get our minds right moving forward. So what does all this mean? I mean, here we are, right? Here's Africa, right? These are the wealthiest African countries today, right? Or approximately today, 2021. But yeah, as you can see, Africa needs a lot of help. Their GDP this is in the billions. So Nigeria, for example, 2021, it's 480 billion, right? South Africa, 415 billion. Egypt, 396 billion, right? So as you can tell and see, they're not wealthy. We have to help our brothers and sisters in Africa grow their economy using our capital. And what they will do is build whatever industries, foundations, whatever they need to where we can invest. This is an investment. This isn't giving. This is investing in these countries to flip your dollar. All right. This isn't a handout. I'm telling you, this is something that we can invest and they can build industries. And when these industries thrive off of Africa's population growth in the next 20, 30 years, you will see exactly what I'm saying. We as a people can all live lavishly, or at least better than what we're being prompted with today, right? So it's very important that we help our brothers and sisters. As we can see, they just don't have the money that we have. And keep in mind, Nigeria has like 200 million people. South Africa has like 60 million. Egypt, can't remember, but it's like 90 million. It's like up there. You know, I don't want to be wrong, but it is up there. You see what I'm saying? So there's a lot of people, but not a lot of wealth. Now, I broke this down just kind of based off of what I believe maybe each country can give. But as you can see, if you just take a glance, maybe you can even pause the video. You can see the United States is obviously contributing the most money, right? $80 billion if we utilize 5% of our check. That's what that basically means. Now, it could be less because I don't know if Black folks are going to be all into this or want to, but basically put it like this. If you make $1,000 in a week, right, I would ask you, are you willing, out of that $1,000 for that week, are you willing to put in $50 to this movement? It's really an investment. Again, it's not giving, it's an investment, right? If you make $4,000 for the month, right, are you willing to give $200 to the movement every month? Somebody's like, well, $200, trust me, you guys spend your money on nonsense stuff already as it is, okay? I know this, all right? I'm from America, I know. But would you be willing to put down a $2,400 investment for the year, right, to build a Pan-African movement? That 2,400 can grow, trust me. It's just a matter of patience and intelligence. Now I can read through the rest of the countries, but this is all approximate, and I don't know what other countries can contribute. I just know what the United States is capable of contributing. But the other countries would have to figure it out for themselves. I didn't want to be too harsh on Haiti and make them seem like they can't contribute anything. Maybe they can, but I understand their situation as well. And even Jamaica, for example, don't be surprised if Jamaicans don't want to give away a couple of dollars, but you understand what I'm saying. The total amount of this Pan-African movement that I just calculated annually is $101.5 billion. Based off of that list you just saw, if we can give the amount of money that we can, that $50 a week, and every other country contributes, we have a total of $101.5 billion in buying power per year. So in the next decade, we can easily attribute $1 trillion in buying power. $1 trillion in buying power? That is significant. And mind you, I underestimated 8 out of the 10 countries, right? So this number can skyrocket if an economist gets their hands on it. If we continue with this 101.5 billion, this would basically be the 9th largest state budget in 2023 between Florida and Michigan. And those are two significant, very wealthy states that have a large population, right? We would be the 9th largest, wealthiest state, basically. We would have the 9th largest state budget. if we utilized this number here. Also, right, out of approximately 193 countries, we would be the 67th wealthiest nation between Kenya and Cuba. We would be in the top 50 percentile in the world if we utilize this number that I've underestimated completely. We would be the 67th wealthiest nation. So obviously we would be able to develop. Kenya and Cuba are developing in some way, some facet. So obviously we would be. Imagine the amount of help we can get. Now, let's talk about something. Because with this number here, there are a number of things that I did not include, which means this number can grow even higher, right? It can grow even higher. So let's take some things into account, right? Number one, President Biden only offered Africa $55 billion in aid over the next 3 years. Now, we're going to keep going down this list. You're going to see that's not a lot of money. But nonetheless, it is money. And it is something that you have to tack on to this overall number, right? So that's a significant amount to where now we're already in $156.5 billion, right? We're already climbing in there with this guy's help. Now, check this out. Ukraine, number two. Ukraine received approximately 40 billion in 2022 alone. So as you can see, Biden is completely undermining us. And this is why we have to put our money together. Screw his 55 billion. We'll just build our own, right? That's the point. I wanted to specifically show those 2 points to show the amount of disrespect. And if you include 2023, Ukraine has received way more than 55 billion in just a year span. So, yeah, take it for what it is. Number three, we did not consider other African diaspora in other countries. We didn't talk about Africans in Italy. We didn't talk about Africans in Germany. We didn't talk about Africans in Netherlands. We didn't talk about Africans in Canada, in India, etc. This number, this 101.5 billion that you're seeing, is completely undermining what we can truly do as a people. Now, here's a greater part. Number four, we did not consider non-Black supporters. We all have family and friends that are Caucasian, Latins, Asian, etc. Are they willing to put in $10 to this? Can they put in 50? You might have relatives, in-laws, maybe they're willing to put in $100. This number, $101.5 billion, is completely undermined. And lastly, number five, we did not consider businesses, investors, nonprofit organizations, and foundations. These companies worth billions of dollars. We didn't include them as well. So given all of these things, I'm almost positive we can get to $250 billion a year. $250 billion a year. I'm positive. We just have to work together. So what's next? Well, hopefully through this presentation, you can start having conversations and discussions. Share this presentation however you can. Share the link. Get the conversation rolling. Because if you're relying on CJ to create a Pan-African movement around the world, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Okay, I'm over here trying to get some checks myself. So I cannot do this by myself, not even close. I need all of the Afro descendants and diaspora around the world and others to help come up with, number two, ideas and solutions. Where do we go from this, right? Number three, the planning and development, right? What's the idea? What's the route to where we get to number four? We can start having action and execution. actually start putting our dollars out there and putting it into a bank, a funding, however it might look. I don't know. Y'all will have to come up with that. But ultimately, number 5, we can get to a final project where we're building um products, we're building ships, we're building distribution centers, which we need more of, um to get us around, right? And sell our products, move our products, so forth, so forth. So, that's the case with what's next. We can obviously have a conversation. I'm obviously not going to stop preaching this. So you'll hear more from me. And here's a reference, and sorry that it's a bit small, but pause it, double check my work, fact check me, do whatever you need to. As I said, I need the economists to track down the actual number, but I'm positive that I'm at least in the area of, what's right. So that is it for this presentation. Thank you so much for being a part of this. I hope that, as I stated, this was a dominant presentation. Hopefully this was something prolific. Hopefully this is something that's inspirational. If you felt connected through your heritage to be a part of this movement, just reach out to me and just let me know who you are, what you do, and where you're from. And we can keep it moving from this point. I got someone in Brazil, right, that I'm trying to connect with, but he speaks Portuguese. And as you can see, I speak English. So it's stuff like that where we need translators, right? And just people to just build and connect with. So with that said, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. I know it was kind of long. I'm starting to lose my voice here. So I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much. Peace.